Let's go now to News Nation's Robert Sherman live in Tel Aviv. Robert, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran appears to be holding still. What's the feeling there, and what are you hearing?
Yeah, Marnie, now that we've hit this 24-hour point here in the ceasefire, there is this feeling on the ground here that things are looking pretty good. And the evidence of that you get from folks is they're out and about. A lot of these restrictions that are across Israel that we're telling people to shelter in place, not leave their homes, those have all been lifted here in central Israel. And as a result, you've seen people out at restaurants, you've seen people out at cafes, people are starting to feel a bit more comfortable about the current situation. Who else is feeling good about all of this, of course? It's President Trump. Went to the NATO summit there, claiming victory for brokering this deal between Iran and Israel, feeling very good about the prospects of potentially parlaying this into long-term relations with Iran and around the region. And on that same subject here, Marty, I do want to show you this billboard that just went up in Israel today. You can see it down in the left-hand corner of your screen right there. It's rather small, where that's being shown there, but it says the Abraham Alliance, and it has the faces of all of the different leaders that are here in the region here. This is the big focus that is happening on the ground in the Middle East right now. Normalization. That is what the Israelis are looking for. And you see all the leaders around the region there. Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Syria. That's the dream that people have here. That's the vision that the president has talked about. And you can see very clearly certain groups here on the ground in Israel hoping that the president will make this a priority in the Middle East here. Marnie?
Two questions for you, Robert. First of all, as the ceasefire holds, there were missiles that got through and damage done in Israel.
Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister expected to visit Washington today, where he will reportedly face pressure for the Trump administration to end the war in Gaza.
Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel's operation against Iran has opened up more opportunities for them. Quote, first and foremost, to rescue the hostages and defeat Hamas, and also broad regional possibilities.
President Trump continuing to call for a ceasefire in Gaza and for a return of all hostages, adding that more countries could be joining the Abraham Accords.
Has any other country suggested to you recently, as a result of this, that they want to join the Abraham Accords?
Yes. So we have some really great countries in there right now, and I think we're going to start loading them up because Iran was the primary problem.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has suggested Syria could also be one of those countries joining in. And here to break all of this down is foreign affairs analyst and former George W. Bush appointed U.S. Commissioner member Harley Littman. Harley, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So Iran has been sending a lot of mixed signals on what direction they're going to take their country. So first of all, what are the chances, in your estimation, of the United States and Iran having some sort of discussion this week?
Iran is going to have discussions, and they're very clever negotiators. And they just announced at the UN that they will enrich uranium no matter what international pressure happens, and they will do it indefinitely. So clearly that sends a signal, as President Trump said just a moment ago on your newscast, that Iran is the problem. But there is a solution here, which is the Abraham Accords. And what a lot of people may not realize is the Abraham Accords means peace with your neighbors. What President Trump is doing is going to transform the Middle East in a way that we haven't seen in over 100 years. You have Lebanon, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. I arrived in Israel today. I'm meeting with the American ambassador, Mike Huckabee, this Wednesday at 2 o'clock. And I'm meeting with Israeli ministers in the next 2 days because big things are going on in the Middle East right now.
They certainly are. And on the Abraham Accords front, Harley, the possibility of Saudi Arabia and even Syria potentially entering into these accords. I mean, just 6 months ago, especially on the Syria front, no way anybody thought that was possible. Is it now?
It's more than possible. It's likely to happen. I predict it will happen. And it's due to President Trump, because President Trump showed extraordinary leadership and courage in challenging Iran in a way that no American president has ever done. And he successfully attacked Iran, and Iran was defeated by close coordination between the United States and its close ally, Israel. And the nations in the Middle East saw that they could count on America as a reliable ally, and they could work with America to transform the region. So this is groundbreaking. There's nothing like this that we've seen in our lifetime. And it's going to make dramatic changes in this part of the world that's going to uplift the life of people living in Arab countries that have been suffering so much.
So according to an Israeli media report, Israel is prepared to end the war in Gaza and then turn control over to 4 Arab countries. Do you think that this is what the likelihood is going to be, that this is going to be the outcome? And if so, what would that mean for the hostages that are still in Gaza?
I do think it's a likely outcome. This is part of the reason why I'm here today. I flew in this morning. And I think the result of this will be the freeing of the hostages. This is a primary condition for Israel, and President Trump has been a champion of these poor people who have been savagely beaten and tortured and kidnapped into Gaza. So I've never been this hopeful in my life that something is changing in international relations, and especially in the Middle East, for the good. It's remarkable. It really is.
It certainly is. Hartley, we're going to have you back on to talk about all of this after you meet with the ambassador and Israel.
Kate, the president suggested he was open to sending more Patriot air defense missiles to Ukraine. Is that going to happen? And were there any other assurances that he made directly to Zelensky when they met?
I'll let the president speak on that. That was a private conversation between he and President Zelensky. But the meeting was a good meeting, and it was a meeting towards progress. And the president, as he said, repeatedly wants to see this war come to an end. But I'll let him speak on that specific point.
And Witkoff yesterday suggested that there would be more countries signing on to the Abraham Accords. What's the timeline on that, and which countries specifically is the administration looking to have sign on?
Well, the president is certainly hopeful that more countries in the region will sign on to the Abraham Accords. Again, we want to see in long withstanding and durable peace in the Middle East, and that's the way to do it. And when the president met with the new president of Syria, that was one of the requests that he made for Syria to sign on to the Abraham Accords. I don't have a timeline for you, but this administration wants to see that happen, and our partners in the region should know that. Rachel.
Mr. President, we're 10 days away from the anniversary of your assassination attempt. Do you know any more now about the assassination attempt than you knew then?
Well, the FBI was in the other day with a lot of people, including the Attorney General, who's doing a great job, Pam Bondi, and I'm very satisfied. They gave me a complete presentation. I was very satisfied.
There's a report that you held a secret meeting today with a Saudi official. Are you any closer on expanding the Abraham Accords? Any news from that?
Yeah, we are. It's one of the things we talked about, the Abraham Accords. Now that Iran has been taken out in terms of a nuclear threat, and they have been completely taken out, at least for a very long time, I think a lot of people are going to be joining the Abraham Accords. We have 4 great countries already, but we're going to have a lot of people, I think, joining the Abraham Accords.
We could have a peaceful Middle East if you want trade and prosperity. And, you know, the Iranians obviously don't want that right now, but if he can get other nations, other Islamic nations to join in on this, the Iranians will be left isolated if they don't join as well.
100%. And, that's what, President al-Shara, when I met with him, I asked him if he would be open to the Abraham Accords. And I tell you what, I think that's what should be flushing these countries out. If you're not willing to join the Abraham Accords, then we're going to question your intentions, just like Qatar again. We got to be careful that they're not just defending and supporting any sort of terrorism. Join the Abraham Accords, and that's going to show the rest of the world that you're truly open to peace and prosperity.
The 12-day Israel-Iran war is bound to have ramifications for the Middle East, and the current US administration is eerily optimistic that it's going to turn the tide in their favor, and hence also Israel's. And this optimism was on full display when US envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, said that Israel's military gains against Iran is going to provoke many Arab countries to join the Abraham Accords. Now, whether this is a threat or a warm welcome, we will let the experts decide. But in the next few minutes, we want to answer some fundamental questions around the Abraham Accords. Has the Iran war really made Arabs pro-Israel? Was the war a litmus test for the Saudis? And how is Iran building an accord of its own? I'm Ananya Datta. Let's start this episode of Grey Zone. This this was the exact moment when Donald Trump emerged as the ultimate peacemaker in the Middle East.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
I am grateful to you, President Trump, for your decisive leadership. You have unequivocally stood by Israel's side. You have boldly confronted the tyrants of Tehran. You've proposed a realistic vision for peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
That day and in the weeks to follow, Israel normalized ties with 4 Arab nations: the UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, and Sudan. On paper, the accord majorly stood on 2 pillars: acceptance of Israel as a legitimate state and resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict. But behind the curtains was an idea that geoeconomics could diffuse geopolitical tensions. Richer countries like the US and Israel would provide financial incentives to circumvent non-ending conflicts, like the issue of a Palestinian state. The accord, contradictory to as it is often marketed, was never about peace. None of the signatories of the accords were in direct conflict with Israel to begin with. From the United States' perspective, the Abraham Accord served as a tool to solidify its role as security guarantor of the Middle East. We are seeing a similar narrative since the ceasefire between Israel and Iran has come into effect.
That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
So now seems to be the perfect time to bring the Abraham Accords back from the dead. Hence, Trump sent his best man, Steve Witkoff, on CNBC to say, and I'm quoting, "One of the president's key objectives is that the Abraham Accords be expanded. We think we are going to have some pretty big announcement on countries that are now coming into the accord. We are hoping for normalization across an array of countries that people never would have contemplated would come in. It will also be a stabilizer in the Middle East." Witkoff refrained from mentioning any countries, but the clues might be in how the Arab world was reacting during this war. The 21 Arab and Muslim majority countries made it clear where they stood in the Iran-Israel conflict. In a joint statement, they categorically rejected and condemned Israel's attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran since the 13th of June. And this statement includes 3 or 4 countries that are in fact part of the Abraham Accords: UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan. The strongest statement came from the leader of the Muslim world, Saudi Arabia, the same country that the US has been pushing to normalize ties with Israel. Riyadh referred to Tehran as their quote-unquote brotherly Islamic Republic of Iran and called Israel's attack quote-unquote blatant aggression. Syria seems to be a big positive for the US. The country was once Iran's firmest outpost in the region, but with the Bashar al-Assad regime's ouster, one could find hope. But there is one problem there as well: Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights that sits in southern Syria. The last time Trump was in the White House, the Middle East was a lot different. Abraham Accords were signed, embassies were opened, and direct flights took off and trade boomed. And then the war came. A multi-front war against Israel. Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Houthis in Yemen, all controlled by Iran. The Middle East has changed in how the political cost of this normalization increased once the war began, as Arab public opinion is strongly sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, seeing it as an Arab and not just a Palestinian concern. And this has put many in a pickle. They do condemn the war in Gaza, but also depend on the US for economic growth. So Iran came up with a plan. Tehran calls it MUADA, a Muslim West Asian Dialogue Association, a sort of counter-proposal to the Abraham Accords. MUADA's biggest strength is that it aims to dismantle an issue that has divided the Muslim world for decades: Shia versus Sunni. The scheme notably includes Turkey, a Sunni majority and a historical rival of Iran. The group excludes Israel on religious grounds, marking a clear divergence with an Abrahamic model. Given this context, Muada proposal appears to be an attempt by Tehran to reassert itself on the regional stage by positioning itself as a champion of dialogue and stability, something it's not known for. Both the Abraham Accords and Muada are less about peace and more about power. One is draped in the language of normalization, the other is religious solidarity. Neither truly address the Palestinian question. We understand that the US sees momentum. There's a weakened Iran, a decisive Israeli military campaign, and a chance to reboot diplomacy with economic sweetness. But the reality is, Arab governments may shake hands, but it's Arab streets that are watching Gaza, not Tel Aviv. And that gap between diplomacy and public sentiment has never been wider. I'm Ananya Datta, and you're watching Grey Zone.